Lydia Ashworth stood at the very back of the massive Coronation Hall, pressed against the cold stone wall where shadows gathered like old friends. At 62 years old, she had learned to make herself invisible in crowds, to slip through gatherings like a ghost that no one bothered to acknowledge. Her simple gray dress, carefully mended and remended over the years, marked her as what she had always been, an Omega without status, without family, without worth in the eyes of those who mattered. The Crimson Moon Pack's coronation ceremony was the most magnificent event the supernatural world had seen in decades. Thousands of werewolves from every corner of the realm had gathered to witness Prince Adrian's ascension to the Alpha King throne, their finest clothes glittering with jewels and precious metals that caught the light of 100 crystal chandeliers. The air hummed with power and excitement, the collective energy of the most influential supernatural beings alive, creating an almost tangible force that made the very walls seem to vibrate. But none of that grandeur was meant for someone like Lydia. She was here only because every member of the pack, regardless of rank, was required to attend. A formality, really, since Omega presence was neither expected nor welcomed at such prestigious events. She had tried to position herself as far from the main proceedings as possible, hoping to fulfill her obligation without drawing unwanted attention to herself. "Look at that pathetic old thing," whispered a young beta female near her, loud enough for Lydia to hear every cutting word. "What is she even doing here? Doesn't she know this ceremony is for important pack members only?" Her companion, equally young and cruel, giggled behind a gloved hand. "I heard she's been with the pack for over 40 years and never once found a mate. Can you imagine being so worthless that no one would claim you for decades?" The words cut deeper than they should have, considering Lydia had heard variations of them her entire life. But after 6 decades of such treatment, she had developed armor round her heart that was nearly impenetrable. Nearly, but not completely. There were still moments when the casual cruelty of others managed to find the cracks in her defenses and remind her of just how alone she truly was. She kept her eyes fixed on the elaborate ceremony unfolding at the front of the hall, where Prince Adrian stood before the ancient altar that had crowned Alpha Kings for over 1,000 years. Even from this distance, she could see that he was everything a supernatural ruler should be: tall, powerful, commanding, with the kind of presence that made other wolves instinctively want to submit to his authority. His dark hair gleamed under the ceremonial lights, and his golden eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire that spoke of centuries of noble bloodline. The high priestess of the moon goddess raised the crown of stars above his head, the ancient artifact catching and reflecting light in ways that seemed almost magical. The crown itself was a masterpiece of supernatural craftsmanship, forged from silver that had been blessed by every high priestess for the past millennium, and set with gems that were said to contain fragments of fallen stars. By the power of the moon goddess and the ancient laws of our kind, the high priestess intoned, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, "I crown the Adrian Blackstone, Alpha King of all supernatural realms, protector of the weak, guardian of the ancient ways, and keeper of the sacred laws." The crowd erupted in cheers and howls of approval that shook the very foundations of the great hall. Thousands of voices joined together in celebration of their new king, a sound so powerful and joyous that it seemed to reach the heavens themselves. Even Lydia found herself caught up in the moment, her heart swelling with pride for her pack and the magnificent leader who would guide them into the future. But her moment of happiness was short-lived. The same beta female who had been mocking her earlier turned around with a sneer that could have curdled milk. "Did you hear that, old Omega?" she said with vicious satisfaction. "Our new king spoke of protecting the weak. Maybe he'll take pity on you and find you a nice retirement home, where you won't embarrass the pack anymore." Her friend joined in the laughter, their voices carrying enough to draw attention from other nearby pack members. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around Lydia, their expressions ranging from amused contempt to outright disgust. She found herself the center of a circle of wolves who saw her as nothing more than entertainment, a pathetic figure to mock and belittle for their own amusement. 40 years in this pack, and what does she have to show for it?" asked a middle-aged alpha male whose expensive suit probably cost more than Lydia earned in a year. No mate, no children, no accomplishments of any kind. She's a drain on pack resources, if you ask me. I heard she works in the kitchens, added another voice from the growing crowd, scrubbing floors and washing dishes like the servant she's always been. Honestly, why do we even keep omegas like her around? They serve no purpose except to remind us what failure looks like. Lydia felt her cheeks burning with shame, but she kept her eyes downcast and her mouth firmly shut. Experience had taught her that any attempt to defend herself would only make things worse. The best strategy was to endure the humiliation in silence and hope they would grow bored with their game soon enough. But the circle was growing larger, and the comments were becoming increasingly cruel. Someone mentioned her gray hair and lined face, making jokes about how she looked like a grandmother without any grandchildren to claim her. Another person questioned whether she even deserved to be called a wolf anymore, suggesting that decades of loneliness had stripped away whatever supernatural essence she might have once possessed. The worst part wasn't the words themselves, though they stung like physical blows. The worst part was the laughter, the way her pain became entertainment for people who had never known a day of struggle. In their privileged lives, they found genuine joy in her misery, feeding off her humiliation like parasites feeding off a host. Please, she whispered, so quietly that only those closest to her could hear. I just want to watch the ceremony in peace. Peace? The beta female laughed louder, attracting even more attention from the surrounding crowd. You want peace? Then maybe you should have thought about that before showing up where you don't belong. This is a celebration for wolves with dignity, with status, with something to contribute to the pack. What exactly have you contributed, old woman? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Lydia felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, even from across the vast hall. She could sense that their disruption had begun to draw attention from the more important guests. Soon, their mockery would become a spectacle that the entire coronation would witness. She opened her mouth to speak, to try to deflect their attention, or perhaps to apologize for her very existence, when something unexpected happened. A hush fell over the crowd near her, starting with those closest to the front of the hall and rippling backward like a wave approaching. Sure, the newly crowned Alpha King Adrian had risen from his throne and was walking down the center aisle of the great hall, his golden eyes scanning the crowd with an intensity that made even the boldest wolves step back respectfully. His gaze seemed to be searching for something specific, and as he drew closer to where Lydia stood surrounded by her tormentors, that gaze fixed directly on her. The crowd around her melted away, as if they had never been there, suddenly finding other places to be and other things to discuss. The beta female who had been leading the mockery turned pale as moonlight when she realized the Alpha King's attention was focused on their little group. But Adrian didn't stop at a respectful distance as everyone expected. He kept walking until he stood directly in front of Lydia, his imposing presence making her feel smaller and more insignificant than ever. For a moment that lasted an eternity, the most powerful supernatural being in the world studied the face of the most powerless. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone present, including Lydia herself, Alpha King Adrian dropped to one knee before her. The entire great hall fell into complete silence, thousands of supernatural beings holding their collective breath as they tried to process what they were witnessing. The newly crowned king, still wearing the crown of stars, had knelt before an elderly Omega in a mended gray dress. My lady, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. I have been searching for you for a very long time. Subscribe to our channel immediately to discover the shocking truth behind this incredible moment. What connection does the Alpha King have to this forgotten Omega? Why has he been searching for her? Don't miss the breathtaking revelations that will change everything you thought you knew about power, respect, and hidden nobility. Hit that subscribe button now for more epic supernatural stories. The silence in the great hall was so complete that Lydia could hear her own heartbeat, thundering in her ears like drums announcing the end of the world. Every eye in the massive space was fixed on the impossible scene before them, their newly crowned Alpha King kneeling before the most insignificant member of their pack. The weight of their collective stare felt like a physical force pressing down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her beneath the enormity of this moment. "Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the perfect quiet. "I think there's been some mistake. I'm nobody important. I'm just Lydia from the kitchens." Alpha King Adrian's golden eyes softened with something that looked remarkably like affection. And when he spoke, his voice carried a warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a protective embrace. "There's no mistake, Lady Lydia, though I suspect you've forgotten who you truly are after so many years of being told you were worthless. Lady Lydia." The title hit her like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories she had spent decades trying to bury. Images flashed through her mind: a grand estate with gardens that bloomed year-round, servants who bowed respectfully when she passed, tutors who had educated her in languages and literature, and the complex politics of the supernatural world. A life of privilege and purpose that had ended in tragedy and exile so complete. She had almost convinced herself it had all been a dream. "You remember now," Adrian said, watching the recognition dawn in her eyes. "I can see it in your face. You remember the Ashworth estate, the family that ruled the Eastern Territories for 3 centuries. You remember being the beloved daughter of Alpha Duke Marcus Ashworth, heir to one of the most powerful supernatural bloodlines in existence." The crowd around them began to murmur, whispers spreading like wildfire through the vast hall as pack members struggled to process this revelation. Lydia Ashworth wasn't just some forgotten Omega after all. She was Lady Lydia Ashworth, daughter of a duke, member of a noble family whose magical bloodline was the stuff of legend. But she was also the sole survivor of the Ashworth massacre, the tragic event that had wiped her entire family from existence. 43 years ago, everyone knew the story, though most had forgotten the few survivors who had scattered to other packs in the aftermath. A coordinated attack by enemies of the crown had left the estate in ruins and the family dead, their wealth seized and their lands distributed among the attackers as rewards for their betrayal. "I'm not that person anymore," Lydia said, though her voice shook with the weight of memories that refused to stay buried. "That girl died with her family. I'm just an Omega now, just a servant who washes dishes and scrubs floors. Whatever I was before doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me," Adrian replied with fierce conviction. "It matters because you're the rightful heir to the Ashworth legacy, because your family died protecting secrets that saved my father's life, and because I swore an oath to make things right. If I ever found you alive." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small object that made Lydia's breath catch in her throat. It was a locket, tarnished with age but unmistakably familiar. She had worn that locket every day of her childhood, a gift from her mother that contained a portrait of their family in happier times. She had thought it lost forever in the chaos and flames that had consumed her old life. "Your father gave this to my father just before the attack," Adrian explained, holding the locket out to her with reverent care. He knew betrayal was coming, knew that enemies had infiltrated the highest levels of government. Instead of fleeing to save his own family, he chose to stay and fight, to give my father the information needed to root out the traitors and protect the crown. Tears began streaming down Lydia's weathered cheeks as she accepted the locket with trembling hands. The metal was warm against her palm, as if it had been waiting all these years to return to her. When she opened it, the tiny portraits inside were exactly as she remembered, her parents young and happy, herself as a bright-eyed child who believed the world was full of magic and possibility. "He saved the kingdom," Adrian continued, his voice growing stronger with passion and conviction. "Your father's sacrifice exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the supernatural government. Without his warning, my family would have been assassinated and the realm would have fallen into chaos. Every wolf alive today owes their freedom to Duke Marcus Ashworth's courage." The murmuring in the crowd had grown louder, pack members struggling to reconcile this revelation with the Omega they had dismissed and mocked for decades. Lydia could see recognition dawning on some faces, particularly among the older wolves who might have been present during her family's reign. Others looked skeptical, unable or unwilling to believe that the servant they had treated as invisible could be nobility in disguise. "But why didn't you reveal this before?" asked a voice from the crowd. It was one of the high-ranking betas who had been particularly cruel in her mockery. If she's really Duke Ashworth's daughter, why has she been working as a servant all these years? Adrian's expression darkened, his golden eyes flashing with anger that made several pack members take involuntary steps backward. Because when she arrived at this pack as a traumatized 19-year-old refugee, instead of being welcomed and protected as she deserved, she was treated as a burden. Her identity was hidden for her own safety, but somewhere along the way, the truth was forgotten or deliberately ignored by those who should have honored her sacrifice. The accusation hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Lydia could see guilt and shame spreading through the crowd as pack members realized their complicity in her mistreatment. For 43 years, they had worked alongside a duchess, had ordered around a woman whose bloodline was more noble than most of theirs combined. They had mocked her, dismissed her, and made her feel worthless when she was actually one of the most important people in their midst. "I was told my identity needed to remain secret," Lydia said quietly, her voice growing stronger as the truth finally found its way to the light. "The old Alpha King promised me that when the time was right, when it was safe, my true heritage would be acknowledged. But he died, and his son died, and somehow the secret died with them. I became just another Omega, and eventually I convinced myself that was all I had ever been. Well, I'm here to correct that mistake," Adrian declared, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. "Lady Lydia Ashworth, by the authority vested in me as Alpha King, I hereby restore your rightful title and status. You are no longer an unnamed Omega but a Duchess of the realm, with all the rights and privileges that title entails." The formal declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Pack members who had treated her as a servant just moments before now found themselves in the presence of someone who outranked most of them by blood and title. The social hierarchy they had taken for granted had just been turned completely upside down. But Adrian wasn't finished. From another pocket, he withdrew a small silver pin shaped like a star, its surface engraved with symbols that marked it as one of the highest honors in the supernatural world. "Furthermore," he continued, "I name you Lady Advisor to the Crown, keeper of the Ashworth archives, and guardian of the secrets that your family died to protect." Lydia stared at the pin in shock, unable to fully process the magnitude of what was happening. In the span of minutes, she had gone from invisible servant to one of the most powerful positions in the kingdom. The weight of responsibility that came with such a role was overwhelming, but so was the sense of rightness, of finally reclaiming the purpose that had been stolen from her so many years ago. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word, "I accept these honors, but I must ask, why now? Why reveal the truth at your coronation, in front of the entire supernatural world?" Adrian's smile was brilliant enough to light the entire hall. "Because a king's first act should be an act of justice. Because your family's sacrifice deserves to be remembered and honored. And because I wanted everyone to understand that true nobility isn't about birth or wealth or status symbols. It's about courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to do what's right even when it costs you everything." He gestured to the crowd around them, many of whom were now looking shamefaced and uncomfortable. "Let this be a lesson to all present. Look beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, beyond the lies that society tells you about who matters and who doesn't. The woman you mocked and dismissed as worthless has more honor in her little finger than most of you have in your entire bodies." The rebuke hit its target with devastating accuracy. Lydia could see the beta female who had been leading the mockery earlier, her face now pale with the realization of just how badly she had misjudged the situation. Others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that their treatment of her had been witnessed and remembered by their new king. "Now," Adrian said, turning back to Lydia with a smile that transformed his stern features into something warm and approachable, "I believe we have a celebration to continue. Would you do me the honor of joining me at the high table, Lady Ashworth? I have 43 years of stories to catch up on, and I suspect you have questions about your family's legacy that deserve proper answers." As he offered her his arm, with the courtesy due to a duchess, Lydia felt something inside her chest that she hadn't experienced in decades. It was hope. bright and warm and powerful enough to chase away the shadows that had haunted her for so long. "The honor would be mine, Your Majesty," she replied, accepting his arm with a grace that came flooding back as if it had never left. Together, they walked toward the front of the great hall, past hundreds of pack members who watched in stunned silence as their invisible Omega transformed back into the noble woman she had always been. Don't miss the incredible conclusion to this story of hidden nobility and royal justice. Subscribe to our channel to see how Lady Lydia reclaims her rightful place and discovers that sometimes the greatest transformations happen when we remember who we truly are. Hit that subscribe button for more amazing tales of supernatural royalty and second chances. The weeks following the coronation passed in a whirlwind of transformation that left Lydia feeling as though she was living in someone else's dream. The modest quarters she had occupied in the servants' section of the pack house had been replaced by a magnificent suite in the noble wing, complete with sitting rooms, a private library, and windows that overlooked gardens she had only ever seen from a distance while scrubbing floors. But the physical changes were nothing compared to the emotional and social upheaval that came with reclaiming her true identity. Pack members who had ignored her for decades now bowed respectfully when she passed, their eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, curiosity, and newfound respect. The beta female who had led the mockery at the coronation had actually approached her with a trembling apology, though Lydia suspected the woman's remorse had more to do with fear of royal displeasure than genuine regret. This morning found her in King Adrian's private study, surrounded by documents and artifacts that told the story of her family's final days. The room itself was a masterpiece of royal luxury, its walls lined with ancient texts and magical artifacts that spoke to centuries of supernatural rule. But Lydia barely noticed the opulence around her, too absorbed in the painful process of uncovering truths that had been buried for decades. "Your father kept meticulous records," Adrian said, setting another leather-bound journal on the table between them. "Even knowing death was coming, he documented everything he discovered about the conspiracy against my family. These papers contain names, dates, financial records, and evidence that helped us root out every last traitor." Lydia opened the journal with reverent hands, recognizing her father's distinctive handwriting immediately. The pages chronicled the final months of the Ashworth family's existence, revealing a complex web of betrayal and political maneuvering that had ultimately cost them everything. As she read, she could almost hear her father's voice, strong and determined even in the face of certain doom. "He knew they were coming for us," she said quietly, tracing a finger over words written by a man who had been dead for longer than he had been alive. "The entries from the last week. He talks about sending me away to safety. I remember him trying to convince me to visit cousins in the Northern Territories, but I refused. I wanted to stay and help fight whatever was coming. Thank the moon. Goddess, you were stubborn," Adrian replied with feeling. "If you had been at the estate during the attack, we would have lost the last keeper of the Ashworth secrets. Your family didn't just die protecting my lineage, they died preserving knowledge that only you can fully understand." He gestured to an ornate wooden chest that sat open on a nearby table, its contents glittering with the subdued light of precious metals and gems. "We recovered these from the ruins of your family estate, personal items, family heirlooms, documents that somehow survived the fires. Everything that could be saved has been waiting for you to claim it." Lydia approached the chest with the hesitant steps of someone walking toward a grave. Inside, she found treasures that carried more emotional weight than monetary value. Her mother's pearl necklace, her grandmother's silver hairbrush, a collection of family portraits that had somehow escaped the flames. But it was the small leather diary at the bottom of the chest that made her breath catch in her throat. "My mother's journal," she whispered, lifting the book with trembling hands. "I thought it was lost forever." As she opened to a random page, her mother's elegant script seemed to leap off the paper, with life and warmth that transcended death itself. The entry was dated just 2 weeks before the massacre, a mundane account of daily life that carried no hint of the tragedy to come. Her mother wrote about garden planning, social calls, and her pride in Lydia's progress with her magical studies. "She mentions your training Adrian observed, reading over her shoulder. Your family was known for their unique magical abilities, weren't they? Something about being able to sense and counter dark magic. The Ashworth gift, Lydia confirmed. Though her voice carried a note of sadness, every generation produced at least one family member who could detect magical corruption and purify it. My grandmother could cleanse cursed objects. My mother could heal magical wounds that others couldn't touch. And she trailed off, uncertainty clouding her features. You inherited the gift as well, Adrian said with conviction. I can sense it in you, even after all these years of suppression. That's part of why your family's enemies wanted you all dead. The Ashworth gift posed a direct threat to anyone using dark magic. For political gain, the revelation hit her like a physical blow. For decades, she had felt hollow inside, as though some essential part of herself had been carved away in the trauma of losing everything. She had assumed her magical abilities, had died with her family, another casualty of the massacre that had stolen so much from her. I haven't used magic in over 40 years, she admitted, staring down at hands that had once glowed with purifying light. I was afraid that if anyone discovered what I could do, they would realize who I really was. So I buried it so deep I forgot it existed. But it's still there, Adrian assured her, moving to stand beside her chair. I can feel it responding to my presence, trying to break free of the barriers you've built around it. Would you be willing to try just a small demonstration to see if the gift survived? Fear and hope warred in Lydia's chest as she considered his request. The thought of reaching for magic after so many years of denial terrified her, but the possibility of reclaiming another piece of her lost identity was almost irresistible. Slowly, she nodded her consent. Adrian withdrew a small object from his desk drawer, placing it carefully on the table between them. It was a ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming with an oily sheen that made Lydia's skin crawl just from looking at it. Dark magic radiated from the weapon like heat from a forge, making the very air around it feel thick and poisonous. This was confiscated from one of the conspirators who participated in your family's murder, he explained. It's been corrupted with blood magic, used to channel power stolen from innocent victims. If your gift is still active, you should be able to sense its true nature. Lydia stared at the dagger, her newly awakened magical senses recoiling from the darkness that clung to it like a second skin. She could feel the screams of its victims echoing in the metal, could sense the twisted rituals that had transformed a simple blade into an instrument of pure evil. The wrongness of it made her stomach turn and her hands shake with revulsion. It's horrible, she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest as waves of nausea washed over her. I can feel the pain of everyone it's hurt, all the innocent blood that's been spilled to feed its power. How can anyone bear to touch such a thing? Most people can't sense anything beyond its physical appearance, Adrian said, his voice filled with something that sounded like relief. The fact that you can feel its corruption so strongly proves that the Ashworth gift is very much alive within you. Now, do you think you could purify it? The suggestion made her recoil instinctively. Purification magic required direct contact with corrupted objects, and the thought of touching that abomination made her entire being rebel in horror. But beneath the fear, she felt something else stirring, a sense of righteous purpose that had been dormant for far too long. I can try, she said, though her voice shook with uncertainty. I'm not sure I remember how, but I can feel something responding to the blade's presence, something that wants to cleanse the darkness from it. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand toward the dagger. The moment her fingers made contact with the corrupted metal, pain shot through her entire body like lightning made of ice and fire. The weapon's evil tried to pour into her, seeking to corrupt her own magical essence and turn her gift against itself. But Lydia had survived 43 years of emotional torture, had endured decades of being treated as worthless and invisible. The darkness in the dagger was powerful, but it was nothing compared to the strength she had developed through sheer survival. She gritted her teeth and pushed back against the corruption, calling on reserves of power she had forgotten she possessed. Light began to emanate from her hands, soft at first but growing steadily brighter as her confidence returned. The purifying energy flowed through the blade like water washing away stains, dissolving the accumulated evil and revealing the clean metal beneath. within moments. The dagger had been transformed from an instrument of darkness into a simple, harmless piece of steel. Extraordinary, Adrian breathed, staring at her with an expression of awe and something deeper that made her heart flutter in ways she hadn't experienced since she was a young woman. I've never seen magic that pure, that focused. You didn't just cleanse the corruption. You completely erased every trace of its influence. Lydia looked down at her hands, which still glowed faintly with residual magical energy. For the first time in decades, she felt complete, whole, like a missing piece of her soul had finally been restored. The Ashworth gift wasn't gone after all. It had simply been waiting for the right moment to resurface. This changes everything, she said, her voice filled with wonder and growing determination. If I can purify corrupted objects, if the gift is as strong as it ever was, then I can help you in ways I never imagined. There must be other artifacts like this one, other tools of darkness that need cleansing. More than you know, Adrian confirmed grimly. The conspiracy that killed your family was vast, and we're still discovering caches of corrupted magical items they left behind. Until now, we've had to keep them locked away because no one else possessed the power to safely neutralize them. But with your help, we could finally destroy the last remnants of their dark legacy. The prospect of using her gifts to serve the greater good, of finally having a purpose that matched her noble heritage, filled Lydia with a sense of rightness she hadn't felt since she was 19 years old. For the first time since the coronation, she truly understood why fate had kept her alive through all those years of hardship and invisibility. She wasn't just Lady Lydia Ashworth, restored Duchess and keeper of family secrets. She was the last guardian of the Ashworth gift, the only person alive who could complete the work her family had died trying to finish. Subscribe to our channel to witness the incredible finale of this transformation. How will Lady Lydia use her rediscovered powers to serve her king and kingdom? What romantic developments await between the noble Omega and the Alpha King who saved her? Don't miss the stunning conclusion where ancient magic meets modern destiny. Hit that subscribe button now. 1 year had passed since that transformative coronation day, and the supernatural world had learned to recognize Lady Lydia Ashworth as one of the most invaluable advisors in the Alpha King's inner circle. Her reputation as a purifier of dark magic had spread throughout the realm, bringing visitors from distant territories who sought her unique abilities to cleanse corrupted artifacts and heal magical wounds that others couldn't touch. But it was the quiet moments, like this evening in the royal gardens, that truly showed how far she had come. Lydia walked among the moonlit roses wearing a gown of deep sapphire silk that complemented her silver hair, which now fell in elegant waves rather than the severe bun she had worn during her servant years. The transformation wasn't just physical, though that was remarkable enough. It was the confidence in her bearing, the light in her eyes, the way she carried herself like the Duchess she had always been meant to be. "You're thinking to heart again," came a familiar voice from behind her. She turned to see King Adrian approaching, though he had long ago asked her to call him simply Adrian when they were alone. Tonight he wore simple dark clothing rather than royal regalia, looking more like a man than a monarch as he joined her beside the fountain that marked the garden's heart. "I was thinking about time," she replied, accepting the arm he offered as they continued their evening stroll. How strange it is that a single moment can change the entire trajectory of a life. 1 year ago, I was invisible, forgotten, convinced I had no value beyond my ability to scrub floors and wash dishes. And now, he prompted, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. "Now I remember who I was always meant to be," she said with quiet conviction. "Not just Lady Ashworth, not just a duchess or a magical healer, but someone with the power to make a real difference in the world. Your recognition didn't just restore my title, Adrian, it restored my sense of purpose." They paused beside a marble bench that overlooked the garden's lower terraces, where magical flowers bloomed in colors that existed nowhere else in nature. The scene was so beautiful it seemed like something from a fairy tale, and Lydia had to remind herself that this was actually her life now, not some elaborate dream from which she would eventually wake. "There's something I need to tell you," Adrian said, his voice taking on a seriousness that made her look at him with growing attention. Something I've been trying to work up the courage to say for months now. The nervous energy radiating from him was so unlike his usual commanding presence that Lydia felt her heart begin to race with anticipation and something that might have been hope. Over the past year, their relationship had deepened beyond the formal boundaries of king and advisor. They had shared countless hours working together, talking about everything from magical theory to childhood memories, discovering a compatibility that went far beyond their professional duties. The night of my coronation, when I knelt before you in front of the entire supernatural world, I told everyone it was about justice and recognition, he continued, his golden eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. And that was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. What was the whole truth? She asked softly, though part of her already suspected what he was going to say. The whole truth is that I had been looking for you for years, not just because of what your family did for mine, but because of what you mean to me personally. He reached for her hands, his touch warm and gentle and somehow electric. My father told me stories about you when I was young. He described the brilliant, compassionate young woman who had visited our court with her parents, who had shown such promise and wisdom even as a teenager. Lydia felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes as memories surfaced of formal dinners at the royal court, of conversations with a young prince who had seemed wise beyond his years. She had been 19 then, and he had been barely 16. But even then there had been something special about their interactions. I remembered you, she whispered, the realization hitting her like a revelation. You were the prince who asked me about purification magic, who wanted to understand how it worked. You said you hoped to meet someone like me again someday. And I meant it, he confirmed, his thumb tracing gentle circles over her knuckles. When the massacre happened, when you disappeared, I grieved not just for the loss of your family, but for the loss of what might have been between us. I've spent 25 years wondering if you had survived, hoping against hope that someday fate would bring you back into my life. The weight of lost years settled between them, decades of missed opportunities and separate struggles that had shaped them both in profound ways. But rather than sadness, Lydia felt a deep sense of rightness, as if everything had happened exactly as it was meant to happen to bring them to this moment. When I saw you at the coronation, being mocked and dismissed by people who couldn't see your true worth, it broke my heart, Adrian continued, his voice thick with emotion. But it also gave me the chance to do what I should have done 25 years ago, to claim you, to protect you, to show the world that you were mine to cherish and defend. Yours? She asked, though her heart was already singing with the answer she hoped to hear. If you'll have me, he said, dropping to one knee just as he had that night in the great hall. From his pocket, he withdrew a ring that took her breath away completely. It wasn't the massive, ostentatious jewelry she might have expected from royalty. Instead, it was a perfect representation of her own nature, elegant, understated, and radiating a quiet power that was unmistakable once recognized. The band was crafted from silver that seemed to glow with its own inner light, set with a stone that looked like captured starlight. But it was the magical resonance coming from the ring that truly amazed her. She could feel the purification, magic woven into its very structure, could sense the protective wards that would shield the wearer from any form of magical corruption. Lydia Ashworth, he said, his voice carrying the same formal weight it had held during that life-changing coronation ceremony. You are the other half of my soul, the completion of my heart, the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying. Will you do me the honor of becoming my queen? Queen, the word hit her with the force of a revelation, bringing with it images of a future she had never dared to imagine. Not just any queen, but a queen whose unique gifts could protect and serve the supernatural world in ways no one else could manage, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that had survived decades of separation. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Adrian, I will marry you, I will be your queen, and I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the trust you've placed in me. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Lydia felt a surge of magic unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just her own power or his, but something new created by their union. a force that would allow them to accomplish together what neither could achieve alone. You know what this means, don't you? He asked as he rose and drew her into his arms. You'll never be invisible again. You'll never be dismissed or overlooked or treated as less than you are. From this moment forward, you'll be one of the most powerful people in the supernatural world. I know, she replied, leaning into his embrace with a contentment that felt like coming home. After a lifetime of wandering, but more importantly, I'll be exactly where I belong, doing exactly what I was meant to do, with the man I was meant to love. As they kissed beneath the light of the full moon, surrounded by magical flowers that seemed to glow brighter in celebration of their union, Lydia thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. 63 years of life, 43 years of loss and struggle, 1 year of rediscovery and purpose, all leading to this perfect moment of completion. The forgotten Omega who had been mocked and dismissed was gone forever, replaced by a queen whose wisdom and magical gifts would guide the supernatural world into a new age of prosperity and peace. And the lonely woman who had spent decades believing herself worthless had discovered that love, true love, was worth waiting a lifetime to find. 6 months later, their wedding would be remembered as the most magnificent celebration in supernatural history. A union that brought together not just two hearts, but two magical bloodlines, whose combined power would protect the realm for generations to come. But tonight, in the moonlit garden where they had finally found each other again, they were simply Adrian and Lydia, two souls who had waited far too long to claim the love that had always been their destiny. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of rediscovery and redemption. If this story of hidden nobility and second chances touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales that prove it's never too late to reclaim your true destiny. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their worth isn't determined by how others see them, but by who they truly are inside. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to never miss our latest inspiring adventures.